Hi there, I'm Trevor and welcome to TH Training Painting. This is part 2 of my rough grounds tutorial, and in this video I'll show you how to make this piece of terrain, which is just a big pile of rocks which is going to hinder the movement of models in my tabletop games. This model is just a piece of hardboard to which I have textured with some small stones and sand and then with some flock. So I'll grab my tools, get myself a cup of tea and let's get to work. The tools and materials I'm going to use are some sheet materials for the bases. I'll be using some 3mm hardboard, multi-purpose filler, PVA glue, some sand and small stones, flock, and some acrylic paint and paint brushes. To start making my area of rough ground, I'm going to need a base to stick the materials onto. For this piece, I'm using some hardboard that I've cut out into some irregular shapes. You can use whatever sheet material you have available to you, so you could use MDF, plywood, grey board, or even sheets of plastic. Also, if you're making rough ground areas for a particular game, please check out the rules for that game as they may have suggestions on what size of bases to use. But for my tutorial, I'm just going to make different pieces in different sizes that can be laid out in the tabletop to create an area of rough ground. I could start by just gluing the materials onto my wooden bases right away, but this may cause the wood to warp and that would be really bad. However, I do have a solution. And it is to use some multi-purpose filler, add a layer of it onto the bases, and this will help prevent them from warping. Using a small glue spreader and a paintbrush, I'll scoop some of the filler onto my base and then spread it out. Then, using a paintbrush which I've dampened in a little water, I'll just smooth it out. And that's the base done. For this base of rough ground, I'm going to make a clump of rocks, which is simply some small stones mixed with some PVA glue. To start, I'm going to need something to mix into. I'll be using this takeaway food container. With my PVA glue and a box of small stones, I'll add some stones into my mixing container. Add a small amount of the glue to the stones. It's better to add only a little amount of glue when doing this than adding too much. I can always add more glue if I need to. Then, mix it all together. I'm using a glue spreader to do this, but you can use whatever tool you have. Just remember to clean the glue off it when you're finished. I'm looking to have all the stones coated in a thin layer of glue, and hopefully you can see the stones are beginning to stick together. With all the stones coated, I'll grab my base. Sorry if the container is in the way, however, I'm just tipping the stones out onto my base. Then I'll move them around to create the clumps or piles of rocks. And when I'm happy with the look of my rocks, I'll just leave this all to dry. When the glue in the clumps of stones is dry, I'm going to add texture to the rest of the base. And for that, I'm going to glue some sand onto it. So, grabbing my tub of PVA glue and a paintbrush, I'll just add the glue onto the areas where I have no stones attached. Quick tip, you can add some acrylic paint to PVA glue if you have difficulty seeing where you've added the white glue onto the white filler. With all the glue added, I'll grab my container of kiln dried sand, set the model into the lid, and then sprinkle the sand all over it. Tap off the excess and then leave this all to dry. The next thing I want to do is seal the base with this sealant mixture I've made. It is equal parts multi-purpose filler, PVA glue and water, which I'll paint onto the base using an inexpensive paintbrush. The sealant helps the stones and sand adhere to the base and also increases their durability, so bits won't fall off when I'm using them in my games. The glue in the base is now dry and I have this nice big clump of rocks, which will cause all manner of movement issues in my games. Now I can seal it with my mixture. With some paper down to protect my work surface, I'll grab a paintbrush and remember to use an old or inexpensive paintbrush for this as it will wreck brushes. I'll just paint the mixture onto my base, making sure to get it all over it. I don't worry if any stones fall off the base when I'm adding the sealant, it just means they won't properly adhere to the base and it's better to fall off now than when I'm painting, or even worse when I'm gaming with the model. With the sealing mixture now dry, I'm ready to start painting my rough ground model. I'll start by painting the stones with a base coat of this neutral grey acrylic paint. I have some paint in my palette thinned down with a little water. I'll grab a paintbrush and start painting the stones, making sure to get in between the stones. That's the base coat added, I'll just wait for this to dry. Now I'm going to paint the base coat onto the rest of the base, and for that I'm going to use some burnt umber acrylic paint. With some watered down paint in my palette, I'll start painting the brown onto the rest of the base. I'm painting around the stones, but I'll also add some into the stones that I'll add some dirt. I'm also painting the edges of the base as well. With the base coats now dry, it's time to start dry brushing my models, and I'll start by using these two lighter shades of grey. Grabbing a flat paintbrush, I'll start with the darker shade of grey and give the stones a heavy dry brush of paint. If you've never done any dry brushing before, you can view my tutorial on it right here. I'm not worried about getting any of the grey paint onto the brown, as I can easily fix that later on when I'm dry brushing the rest of the model. With the grey paint now dry, I'll take a smaller brush and lightly dry brush the stones with the lighter shade of grey just to pick up the highlights. And that's all the stones painted. Now I'm ready to paint the rest of the model, and for that I'm going to dry brush onto the brown with some yellow ochre, followed by some buff titanium acrylic paint. With some paint in my palette, I'll take a small flathead paintbrush and carefully dry brush the yellow ochre onto the model, trying not to get too much of the paint onto the areas where I've already painted. Although I'm not worried if I do get a little bit of paint onto the stones, as it will all help add to the dirt effect. With that paint dry, I can now lightly dry brush the buff titanium with a small paintbrush. And that is all the painting completed. Here is my area of rough ground made with clumps of stone. It's looking really good and I could start gaming with it right now. However, I'm going to add some flock to my model to represent grass. And for that I'm going to use some mid-green vine turf flock. With some flock in a container, I'm also using this tray to help sprinkle it into. I'll grab my PVA glue and a paintbrush, then paint the glue onto the base in the areas where I want grass to be. When making your own rough ground models, you can decide how much glue to add depending on how much or how little flock you want on them. I'm going to add quite a bit of flock to this model. I can also use the flock to cover up any areas I may have messed up while I was doing my dry brushing. With the glue added, I'll set the model down and gently sprinkle the flock over them, making sure to cover the areas where I applied the glue. I'll quickly tap off the excess flock, just so I can show you what the model looks like, and it is looking great. However, I'll just leave it to dry completely before removing any of the excess flock. Here is my completed area of rough ground with piles of rock. And it is looking great and will look even better on my tabletop. This model may seem relatively small, but you can easily use the techniques I've shown to make larger areas of rough ground if you want to. In an upcoming video, I'll show you how you can combine this technique and the technique from the rough ground part 1 video to create even more rough ground models. So thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this video and have learned how to make some rough ground for your tabletop games. It'd be great if you give this video a like or a share, and remember to subscribe if you want to see more of my content. Also, check out my website at thtrain.com where you can see even more of my work. And you can contact me in the comment section below or through my social media links in the description. And again, thanks for watching.